Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram. What's going on, Josh?
Hey, what's going on, Will?
And we have returning with us Rachel Lazar, who is the president and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, which is an organization that focuses on the separation of church and state. And she is returned back to us to answer all of our questions about what the heck is happening in our country with church and state separation. So welcome back, Rachel.
Good to be back. I love talking to you guys.
We do too. And I guess before
welcome.
Before we get too far down, you all have a special summit coming up in like a month or something like that.
End of April.
You want to tell us what that's about?
I would love to. www.thesurf, like surfboarding, but it's SRF. www.thesurf.org. The Summit for Religious Freedom is the hub of the religious freedom movement. It brings together people from all walks of life, from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. It's half religious, half non-religious. You will be there, and there's like a Black atheist next to like a white Southern pastor next to like a trans advocate from Nebraska. I mean, it's got like all different types. It's kind of awesome. And when you're there, you learn, you advocate. We have a Hill Day, so that's an option. And really, I think more than anything, you feel the power of a movement that you know intellectually exists, and you know that you're probably in the majority because you're actually on the side of the Constitution and you got all the DNA of our country on your side in all the good ways this time. But you don't feel that often, like when you're out there living in your little community, and then you come here and you're like, oh, I don't ever come together with these people. We're bringing the Jews and the Muslims together, right? We're bringing the religious and the non-religious. I mean, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is a pretty amazing event. Josh and I had the opportunity to go last year. Met all kinds of really cool people. And for podcasters that, do this virtually, it was weird just seeing people in real life.
Very weird.
And then realizing
it's like, wait, yeah, like you're short, you're tall, you're like, I don't know, like this is strange.
I know.
But
it is.
You have feet and legs. You know what I mean?
So weird. We're just living in weird times. But I guess
Here we are.
It's like the bad and the good, right? Like we can do this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so to start us off, just real briefly, I'd like to maybe just have you just talk about what Americans United does, and then talk to us a little bit about what is the state of our church-state separation in America today.
Ooh, so I'm going to excite you and then drop you low. So first, Americans United. So something that's really cool is we've been around for almost 80 years, which is pretty impressive. Every day at our organization, we bring together religious and non-religious Americans, and we fight in the courts, in Congress, across all the state legislatures more than ever, and in the public square. And there's lots of ways to say what we fight for. So like the easiest way is church-state separation, right? But even that concept, religious freedom even more so, but even that concept of church-state separation means different things to different people. Like Speaker Mike Johnson of our U.S. House of Representatives, right, who flies the Christian nationalist appeal to heaven flag outside of his office, thinks that church-state separation only goes in one way. It only means that the state better not come into the church and not the other way around, right? But anyway, I digress. So we fight for church-state separation. Another way to put it is we fight for everyone's freedom to believe as they choose, so long as they don't harm others. And yes, where the controversy arises is over harm and who's harmed and what harm is. And then another way that
harm. It's always harm.
It's always harm. And then like the other way we put it, and then I'll stop talking about that part of AU, is we fight for everyone's freedom to believe as they choose. But this one's kind of cooler and more accessible to a lot of people, but also to live as themselves. Because your belief system is such a core part of your identity, and it actually pulses through so many parts of how you conduct yourself in your life. Like, and I'll just give like one example. Like, if you're Jewish, like I am, and you get pregnant and your pregnancy is like putting your health or life at risk, you're actually supposed to like halachically go get an abortion. You know what I mean? So it's like, a lot of people wouldn't think of that as part of their religious and moral scheme, but it actually, and it may even be that if you do that, you don't do it thinking, not everyone does that thinking about their religion, but it's actually deeply informed by our religious and moral beliefs. So that's why we say, that's just one example of why we say freedom to live as you choose and believe as you choose. Okay. That's AU in a nutshell. What the current state is of church-state separation. I love that because it's like, okay, in like 10 seconds, so we can talk about other things. Like, church-state separation is in a code red moment in this country, and there's a lot of deep and long-term damage that's being done to it, and many, many threats. But it's also in a phase of awakening because more and more Americans are understanding how the separation shows up in their lives, and when the separation goes away, how that shows up. And therefore, more and more people are investing in relating again, like understanding this cerebral concept at a more visceral level and defending it and prioritizing it. So that's a really quick summary of the state.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. You know, I post a lot on social media, and of course, I get people from all over the place politically, and I get people really fired up when we talk about this church-state issue. And you know, I wanna bring just kind of a reality check to just our listeners and everyone coming in, and I want to ask you about it. But I want to make sure that I'm getting the information right. So I'm going to read it. Right. So essentially 3 weeks ago, February 20th, the Fifth Circuit cleared the way for Louisiana to hang the 10 commandments in every classroom. And this effectively bypasses 40 years of precedent started by Stone v. Graham. And we can talk about that. By arguing that the historical context of the displays make them secular enough to be able to pass. And so, and be able to be hung up. And today, I believe it was in Lafayette County, it was the deadline for schools to hang up posters. 11 by 14, I think, was the ruling that it had to be. And so essentially a judge, it had been stopped, and then the judge allowed it. So maybe what I would really, it's basically Roke v. Brumley. And what I would love to hear is, can you kind of help our listeners understand what is that case, what's going on there in Louisiana, and why is this important to pay attention to, and what's happening? Where's this going to go, I guess?
Yeah, just a little bit of stuff to talk about. So this Fifth Circuit en banc decision, meaning the Fifth Circuit decision was from the entire appellate court for that region, every judge, right? Like all 18 of them who ruled. The Fifth Circuit had already ruled in this case in the normal way, which means a panel of 3, and had ruled that the preliminary injunction, which means the preliminary order to make sure that they don't get hung, was valid. Like, in other words, don't hang those things until we have a chance to rule on whether it's constitutional. So that, and the Fifth Circuit is traditionally, very conservative. But yes, this went to the Fifth Circuit en banc. They ruled this way. A companion case in Texas.
What is en banc?
So that is every judge. That's
okay.
Place for appeal. So like, first you take your case to the federal district court, which is like the entry level when it's a federal lawsuit, right? This case under the federal constitution, the 2 religion clauses, the free exercise clause and the non-establishment clause together, right? Side note, those 2 clauses work together to protect religious freedom, because you got the free exercise of religion, that's great, but not so much that you can get the state to force someone else to live by your religious beliefs, because then that's interfering with theirs. And so that's like this healthy tension between like non-establishment and free exercise. They work together. We bring cases like this under both. I just want to be really clear. So the court did not yet like apply the history and tradition test and say that this is okay. And in fact, I have an op-ed that I wrote on this that came out in The Hill yesterday. So you can link
Yay.
to it and stuff like that. And I was like, what's the bad news here? What's the good news here? So it's actually, I think, like a good translation piece. But what the court did that was bad is they said, you know what? There are certain circumstances that we can imagine where, like, if this 10 Commandments is hung in a certain context, that it would be okay. And because we can imagine that there could be this circumstance, we're going to actually allow the very thing that would harm families to happen before those families can go to court. In other words, because we don't know yet, because there are in their heads certain moments where it would be okay to hang the 10 Commandments, like in certain surrounded by other documents or whatever, we're going to wait and see. And you have to wait to bring a legal challenge until the harm is done. In other words, until these things are hanging in the classroom. Okay, that's what they said. Is that clear? Yeah. All right. So that's bad.
Because basically, they're trying to say, hey, if you get, like, if something harms, you have to have an actual concrete harm. Like, it's kind of like the idea of standing, maybe. Like, you have to have someone who's been actually harmed in a concrete way in order to bring, like, some kind of judgment. Is that kind of like what you're saying?
Yeah.
And they're saying that hasn't happened, so we need to see how it plays out, kind of thing?
Right. Yes. That's a great way to break it down. And generally speaking, when the facts are the facts and the law is plain and clear, you can bring a lawsuit that facially challenges something before people are harmed and at least says, just temporarily don't do this until you rule so that there's not the harm. And let me just remind everyone that, oh, go ahead, Josh.
Like, it seems so obvious that this is going to create an issue that we don't even need to test it, that kind of idea.
In our view, and I hope in everyone's views out there, once you've hung the 10 Commandments already in classrooms and you've got kids who are going to school seeing the word thou shalt not commit adultery and like, Mom, what's adultery? And, they're like, tiny little kids are like, covet thy neighbor's wife or whatever the language is here. And like, what does that mean? And, and like, you've already got the language, like, thou shalt have no other gods before me. But we have like Hindu plaintiffs who, believe in many gods. And that's like a devout part of their faith, or non-religious or even atheist families that don't believe in a God, right? And not to mention the Jews and the Christians who are our plaintiffs, who are like, this version of the 10 Commandments and this forcing of religion this way doesn't comport with our family's faith, right? So we got so many different problems with it that in our view, in our case, which is named Roke versus Brumley, like, we don't see a scenario where it's okay to hang the 10 Commandments in every classroom. Let me also just remind us, right? Did you all go to public school like I did?
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Indeed.
you're sitting there, right? You're in your classroom, right? Like, in my days, you got your number 2 pencils, the whole thing, right? If we recall, like, I'm trying to bring us back, right? And, you're looking around at the walls, and the things that the school posts on the walls, they're like rules, right? Like rules about what you should and shouldn't do, or like no running in the halls, or, whatever the things are, right? Again, just trying to bring us back. For the average kid, you see what's on the walls and you think that's truth, and maybe if you're not such a good girl like I was, but like you're like a nice, I challenge authority kind of kid, and good for them. Okay. That's maybe more like my twin brother, but in any case, I digress. Then at least you look at the walls and you think, okay, that's clearly what my school wants me to believe. So then you tell me where there's a scenario where public schools, which are the government, right, can appropriately be posting commandments. These are commands. These are religious commands about what to believe, right? And where that's not a violation of religious freedom. Like, that's a big problem with this. It's like, it's the kind of thing where a chill wind blows. You know what I mean? It's like, why would you say that there is like potentially an okay, and yes, the history and tradition stuff, I think, could come into when they decide the case on the merits. And they could say, and it came into this terrible concurrence that Judge Ho wrote, as well, where he's like, well, I just would have rolled on the merits and said, this is great, actually, this is part of our heritage. And I mean, the guy it feels like he's like running for Trump's next Supreme Court appointment, but I
He's
think
like, I heard there's an opening on the Religious Liberty Commission.
seriously, yeah. And he's like, okay, I'm Christian, I fit in. And it's like, because that commission, by the way, has all Christians except for one Orthodox rabbi. And we actually have a lawsuit that we filed against that commission. We can talk about that later. So yeah, I mean, so I think that's like that's the worst of the news. And I say this in my op-ed. What are the sort of little silver linings? Just because I like to be the kind of person who looks for hope, I kind of got to.
Yeah, bless your heart.
Thank you. Number one, they didn't rule on the merits, and they said that, you can bring this case back, and that's really important. Number two, it was pointed out in a dissent that all of the faith voices, all of the clergy and faith organizations that were part of this case, except one, were on the side of church-state separation. And I think that's really powerful. I bet you two are seeing this. Honestly, more and more people of faith, more and more Christians, and bless their hearts in all the good ways, are saying, I do not feel comfortable with my faith being deployed in this political way and imposed, and with faith not being invitational. Absolutely. And with like wrecking my neighbor's religious
I'm
freedom.
one of them.
Like a lot more people are really uncomfortable. And I think that's like a particularly beautiful thing. And I see that every day from where I sit.
Yeah. Rachel, on the Louisiana thing, what role, actually, Josh and I were just talking about this before we hit record, about the role of teachers in these situations, because as you pointed out, stuff that's on the wall, kids are going to look at, they're going to ask questions about, I'm thinking like first day of school kind of thing, or PTA meetings, or whatever. Like the teacher will undoubtedly have to answer the question, what is that? And an explanation would have to be given, like, oh, that's the 10 Commandments from the Holy Bible, and it's what everybody should, try to structure their life around. Or it's like, the atheist teacher, like, I don't know, that's something some crazy people think, I could see like extremes in the explanations, but I'm curious if you or anybody, has thought about like that angle.
100%. And in fact, I'm so glad you asked that, Will, because I actually did a listening tour with teachers and administrators in Oklahoma. They were pretty much like, I think 100% Christian. They didn't have hostility towards Christianity. Some of them said more and more kids are bringing in the Bible to read during voluntary reading time. And I'm good with that. But these teachers, and I love teachers, because I think they're growing the next generation of Americans. We should all be so grateful, and like these teachers are proud they're proud. They take their job seriously. They like to know what they're teaching about. And they raised, when we did the listening tour, they said, we're not comfortable. Like, we're not Bible experts. And like, we also don't want to have to like answer these questions about the Bible. Like, that's not what we're trained in. I will also just say one more thing. I did this really interesting listening tour in a very small town in Tennessee as well. Not of teachers, although I did.
What is a listening tour?
That's when I've been doing this more.
Like you just like go and you just like listen to people? Do you say anything in these tours?
Like find people in the community who can go with me, explain what I'm trying to do, me and my staff, which is like to really understand where people are coming from in these communities better and what they want around these issues, right? Because it makes me a better advocate. And frankly, as you two know best, like these issues are nuanced. They are not simple. And as like the leader of my organization, one of the leaders in this movement, I'm just like I'm just profoundly against oversimplification. It's just like a place I've really been lately. And so I just like to listen and like hear people out on, it also makes me a better advocate. And I love to be an advocate, and I like to figure it out, like where the win-wins, right? It's like when my kids were little, it's like, okay, like you want to make jewelry? I want to make jewelry. Let's do a mommy-daughter jewelry activity, and that worked, versus like, you want to swim at 5 a.m. I don't. Like, we're not going to do swimming, but like in any case, I digress again. But so the listening tour that I did in the small town in Tennessee was really interesting. And I spoke to some parents there, and they were very conservative and white and Christian. And one of the things that like they really unified around was the idea that they're uncomfortable gambling on a public school teacher being the one to teach their kid about the Bible instead of a parent. And then we did polling in Texas and Oklahoma. Like, so, you can't say, oh, that's New York or that's where we did the polling. And it is overwhelming. It is a large supermajority of Texans and Oklahomans who want parents to be teaching kids about the Bible, even over, funny enough, like Sunday schools and Sunday school teachers, even though that figure is high. And what tanks is like low, like below 20% is public school teachers and state legislators. So that's actually, you know what that's called? Common ground. Here's some common ground.
That's
Come on, somebody.
I know that's really cool. So okay, that's one example, excuse me, of church state separation being tested. I want to kind of give you a little bit more obscure example, and this is one we did. We hosted a live Faithful Politics with our buddy Brian Kaler, because he had been studying, or I don't know if that's the right word. He's been writing about the Bible verses that are used by like the Department of Homeland Security and DOD. So essentially we brought him on. We did a live PowerPoint. I mean, there's really no other way to explain it. It was a PowerPoint that people showed up to by choice. and
Brian's our board vice chair.
So awesome.
But that's just how it works, though. Sometimes we just show up to these things by choice. We show up to speeches by choice. We listen to conversations.
Yeah. And so anyways, Brian had been tracking a lot of the Bible verses that DHS and DOD have been using. And we had talked about sort of like what the Bible verses original meaning or intent context was and how it was being misrepresented on social media everywhere. So you look at that, and one side of you might say, oh, that seems relatively benign. What's the big deal? But then the other side, would be like, wait a minute, like I think Josh would say like they are interpreting scripture on behalf of, as the government is interpreting scripture.
Yes. No bueno.
Yeah. So
No
I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
No bueno. I mean, I think like this is the part of church state separation that's just as important for protecting like religion as it is protecting a taxpayer's religious freedom. And I mean, if you believe in religious freedom, then I think you understand that for a lot of people, for their belief system, their faith really is like really important to them. So then if you live in religious freedom, you got it, and you understand that, then you kind of believe that it's bad to harm religion, or at least for me, maybe not everyone, but I believe in that profoundly. People get to have their religions, you know what I mean? And like, that's part of human rights, right? And I just became a United States Commissioner for International Religious Freedom, doing that separately, with a different hat, because AU doesn't do international issues, but I really believe in it. So, I think Brian's right, and Josh and you are right. I think it harms religion when the government co-opts it. This is like a really interesting way, right? Because Brian Kaler has his like redacted language and his way of showing all the state concocted version of the Ten Commandments, and that's really problematic. But I also, and we have like, by the way, Catholic plaintiffs who are like, I have a problem with like this part about graven images, because a lot of people think Catholics have graven images and, the sort of statues and saints and all the stuff that we have. And, we have Jewish and even Christian plaintiffs who say, well, like in our, in our Christian faith, like this sort of what we see as reference to slavery isn't what we believe is, this should be about. And so we don't like this way of referring, to this commandment or, right. So I think that's one important thing. I think the other important thing is strings are attached when, government is funding something And it should be, strings should be attached because, right, it comes like there should be some, understanding of when the government is funding something. And no one wants there to be strings attached to how religion is taught. So I think it's really important to protecting the integrity of religion that we keep church and state separate.
I completely agree that we need to keep church and state separate. Percent. I used to not agree as much as I do now, and I think it's for the very reason that you're saying that's implicit there. Someone has to decide, right, which 10 commandments are going there. What do you mean which? Well, apparently, some versions have taken don't worship any other gods and graven images and put them together, and then separated coveting your neighbor's house and then your neighbor's wife. So that's in some of them. Then there's one that actually has don't have any other gods, and the graven images is 2 and 3, I believe, or something like that. I'm trying to remember, or 1 and 2 actually. And then it has coveting as just 1 at the end. And so the question is, well, which one and why? And then why the King James Version, which to me is not the version I would recommend that any Christian use devotionally or for serious study of the scriptures. They would actually be laughed unless a scholar would be laughed at using that unless it was for like some kind of historical study of the KJV or something like that, because of how much we know about the manuscripts now and the better ones that we have. And anyway, that's not what this is about, but the questions are complicated. And so they're going to mess it up somehow. They're going
to mess it up, and they're going to,
unintentionally, they're going to mess it up regardless of how much intentionality is going to go into this.
And so it inevitably is going to mess up for someone how their very precious faith is taught, right? I mean, that
absolutely.
So that is like an extremely important point that people across this country seem to agree upon. Yeah,
and it's like, what are we going to do when someone, like you said, like, well, my atheist transgender teacher told me that the 10 commandments are just a colonial something or another, and whatever, and it tells you, what are you teaching my kids, and all this stuff. Like, the amount of lawsuits that are going to come out of this is staggering to think about.
And then I think one other thing too, John,
and the burden that it's going to put.
I think that's a great point. Yeah. I think that's definitely true, and it's going to cost the government a lot of money. But
Huge.
I also think there's another point that it's like buried because we're so far from the days when there were religious wars in this country, even here, right?
Yeah,
where like,
absolutely.
Roger Williams was banned from the state of Massachusetts, where like Quakers were killed in the colony of Massachusetts, in this land here, these are religious wars. And obviously like our founders came from, really seeing like the Crusades and religious wars that existed in Europe, and, Protestants versus Catholics. And now it's like, we have little versions of that are definitely still alive, like our Amy Madonna lawsuit, where this Catholic woman in South Carolina wasn't allowed to foster kids from a taxpayer-funded foster care agency because she's Catholic and not evangelical Protestant. So like there's little versions of it that are still like exist, but the divisions that come from, whose version of faith is the government favoring? I mean, I think that's part of the reason why we are more divided today than ever, because of like this backsliding on church state separation. Brian Kaler's research has also unveiled that at the Department of War, they're opening their prayer services with the Protestant version of the Lord's Prayer, whereas at the Department of Labor, they're opening their prayer services with the Catholic version of the Lord's Prayer.
Interesting.
So, it is interesting, but
why?
Like you begin to
and like what's going on? Why are we doing
like
this?
Certain people say, well, I don't like that. Like when I find that out, or why are they favoring their version of Christianity over mine? And it's like, that is just the beginning and it pits us against each other in a country that has been intentional about welcoming people of all faiths and none. That is setting us up for, failure as a pluralistic democracy.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I want to obviously we want to keep in this vein of religious freedom and the issues and this the separation between church and state. And I wanted to get your thoughts on a case that just kind of came out. And you had mentioned that part of your religious beliefs was that you might be required to have an abortion with that. I posted recently, not you specifically, right? I'm saying that someone might have to do that in specific situations, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be a religious act. And maybe you can explain that. But I posted this on social media about this, and it's basically Indiana had a 2022 abortion ban right after the fall of Roe v. Wade there, and Senate enrolled Act 1, I guess, prohibits most abortions except in limited situation. But the ACLU of Indiana, representing Hoosier Jews for Choice, and other plaintiffs argued that for some Hoosiers, the ban substantially burdens religious exercise protected by Indiana's Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is kind of ironic because it's kind of been the thing that conservatives
Indeed.
have used, right? But then again, like, why should only conservatives be able to use this? Like, if people are thinking that, that should concern them immediately. If they feel like a law should only be applicable to a group of people, ideological group at that, that's very concerning. So I would love to hear, like, okay, so because this is going to ignite anger, because I posted something about it, and it's one of those posts that has like 3 likes and has like 60 comments, and you're like, dude, people are angry and they are so mad. One lady was like, I thought Judaism was about life, and apparently they're not. Apparently they don't care about life. So this is obviously so sensitive to some people. They hear abortion and it automatically gets their, the hair on the back of their head is standing up straight. They're all in their amygdala and their stress reaction, fight or flight. Kind of as calmly and as nonpartisan, I guess, maybe as you can. Obviously, I want you to be yourself, but what's going on with the religious beliefs allowing for abortion, even recommending it in certain instances, and like, how much do you know about this issue, and what can you tell us about it?
Yeah. I mean, I do know like a fair amount about it. And like, according to Judaism, the developing life doesn't take on the status of full life, right? And for a long time. And so certainly, for those, there's very little debate, over these earlier stages of pregnancy, that where the woman's life or health is at risk, that is like a living being who has these health, like real risks or even a life risk. And so honoring life is actually what's behind that order, honoring like the life, right? And so that if that that's probably like a really inadequate like explanation for a rabbi or something, but that's like the gist, okay? And I know that to be true.
Yeah, we know you're not a rabbi,
I'm not a
so
rabbi.
you're okay.
but
Thank you for the layman's terms.
yeah, that's the lay explanation. I did want to point out something really interesting, and I actually just looked it up because I thought it was really important.
Yeah, we just talked to Melissa a couple weeks ago.
So according to PRRI 2024 data, parties of most religious denominations in the US believe abortion should be legal in all or most cases, contradicting the idea that religious affiliation automatically aligns with restricting abortion. Majorities of Jewish Americans, Buddhists, Hindus, Unitarian Universalists, Black Protestants, and white mainline Protestants support abortion rights. So I did want to point that out. And I think that is one of the virtues of this lawsuit, which is to say what you were saying, Josh. Religion doesn't just belong to very conservative Christians. Like, it also belongs to very conservative Christians, but there are a lot of us out here who have deep religious affiliations, right? Like myself, like I'm a very proud Reformed Jew. And we think the opposite of the way very conservative evangelical Christians, for example, view the abortion issue. And there's a lot of Christians, a majority, again, a majority of Black Protestants and white mainline Protestants who think differently from those folks. So I think, somehow, like, very conservative Christians have been allowed to co-opt the sort of the place of religion in a lot of people's brains. And it's really important to break out of that. In this case, like using the Religious Freedom Restoration Act this way does do that. And that's good. And what's mostly good is that people for whom, their religious beliefs are different now can access abortion. And that's wonderful news in my view. Because people who don't believe in it don't have to get them. You know what I mean? So like, great for them too. They get to follow their beliefs and, let my people follow ours. But I also, I think that there's a not great side to the case. And you referenced it, Josh, a little bit, like it's been used a lot by opponents to church state separation and those who believe that it's okay to have the government, not just okay, but want the government really to favor their religious beliefs over other people's, or to embed their religious beliefs in its policies. And they have been the most active in their use of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act from the beginning. And in a way, cases and strategies like that deepen that groove. So it's like a mixed ruling in my view. I mean, I think in many ways it's great. And I suppose there's one strategy where you just keep winning on church state separation using RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And then, maybe it makes our opponents be more reluctant to, maybe that creates a good scene in the long run. Look, a lot of church state separation advocates, a lot of people of faith who are angry right now about the neglect of church state separation are like, rah, 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 when they see something like this. And I get it. Like it's got a huge amount of emotional appeal and pull, especially for people of faith. And that's another plus to it. But I just wanted to point out that negative as well.
You mentioned earlier too that you all are got a case against the Religious Liberty Commission, and I'd love for you just to kind of just talk a little bit about that. But before you do, maybe just talk about the Religious Liberty Commission, who they are, who sits on the panel, and like where do they meet?
Yep. Okay, so they meet at the Bible Museum. And who sits on the panel are like ultra conservative Christian leaders of like First Liberty, which brought, the lawsuit on behalf of Coach Kennedy, who prayed with his public school football team. And, that was a Supreme Court case in 2022. Lieutenant Governor Patrick from Texas, who is proud Christian nationalist, many other folks who are leading, in that space. Bizarrely, Dr. Phil, like the TV star, anyway, formerly and not anymore, former whatever she was, Miss America California, or Carrie Prejean Bowler, who said in the first Religious Liberty Commission meeting that America should have Christian rulers. And I just felt puzzled at being able to be an Orthodox rabbi and sit next to her in that moment and not wince. I mean, I felt bad for him. But maybe other people would see it differently. So the Religious Liberty Commission, is primarily Christian. It conducts these series of kind of hearings, primarily in the Bible Museum, mixing religion, and it's overseeing it as the Department of Justice, and the Attorney General is like the lead of the commission, or sort of over the whole commission. So it's like a total mix of government and religion, and it's ultimately supposed to make recommendations to the government that are policy recommendations. And I think that's really significant. Like the Trump administration in 2.0 showed up at the table with like, Project 2025 and like this whole plan to implement, all this white Christian nationalism that we're seeing today. And I mean, they're doing a pretty good job at that. And this commission is part of it because it's going to be making, getting to the policy. So that's what's particularly dangerous about it. So that's like the religion. They've held a whole bunch of hearings, on the military, on schools, on various things. Honestly, like one hearing, included a part on anti-Semitism, which is like very painful for me as a Jewish person because it's like mixing its white Christian nationalist agenda with some legitimate concerns about anti-Semitism in the country. And then my mind explodes, and it doesn't do Jews a lot of favors in a lot of communities where we're already not being looked at nicely today. So I just have all sorts of feelings about that one. But anywho, we did bring a lawsuit if you want to hear about that.
Yeah, I want to hear all about it.
Okay, yeah. So we did bring a lawsuit, and I think it's really powerful because it's actually our fourth lawsuit against the Trump administration, and it's under this federal law called FACA, which like creates requirements for these commissions, basically. And these commissions are supposed to be.
Can you say the name of the commission again?
So it's
did you say FACA?
FACA?
Yeah.
FACA, right?
FACA, the Federal Advisory Committee Act.
I gotcha.
Okay, FACA is what we call it. And it requires advisory committees to be, number one, fairly balanced among competing points of view. Let's analyze this one as, on that basis. Okay, that's the first strike, right? We already just said it's like all conservative Christians except for one conservative Orthodox rabbi. And I'll just point out that, Orthodox is 10% of Jews, right? Like the majority of Jews are Reform and conservative, and that's not politically conservative. It's, it's a denomination of Judaism. So that's not even representative of the majority of Jews. So point number one is FACA requires the advisory committee to be fairly balanced among competing points of view. And point number two is that there has to be public transparency, right? It has to meet a bunch of requirements there. And it has to be structured to avoid inappropriate influence by special interests. In the lawsuit, we represent some of the diverse religious perspectives that the Religious Liberty Commission excludes, including, number one, Interfaith Alliance and its CEO, the Christian Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, Muslims for Progressive Values, because there aren't Muslims on the commission. Number three, Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, because there are no Sikhs, or frankly, any non-Abrahamic faiths at all, and also Hindus for Human Rights. And the relief that we're seeking is that the court declare that the commission was created and administered in violation of federal law, and we want to require the disclosure of documents that should already be public, and to ensure that any recommendations that are produced by the Religious Liberty Commission are clearly identified as coming from an unlawfully constituted commission. We filed the lawsuit on February 9th, and there have been no hearings or decisions to date.
Wow. It's pretty cool that I get to talk to someone who's suing the government. That's that's in an organization that's suing. Rachel Lazar is not suing the government, right? So just an important distinction I wanted to make.
Thank you. I want to live.
Yes, please. We want to live. So I want to shift. Just think about LGBTQ issues in religion and politics in the courts right now. And I want to mention 3 cases, and we can tie them together however you want. But I'll just do this, and then I'll give the question. Chiles v. Salazar, That's the one hasn't been decided yet, correct? It
Correct.
has not? Okay.
Correct.
And it's about regulating harmful professional conduct by banning conversion therapy for minors. We can talk about that. Mahmoud v. Taylor, which was decided for parents to be able to opt out of a material that they thought was against their faith or offensive to their faith. That was in June 27, 2025, that. So, and then Mirabelli v. Bonta. And this one I want to read a little bit more because I just want to make sure it's clear because it might not be as known to people. Because March 2nd, 2026, the Supreme Court vacated. So, and maybe you can help us understand what that means. The Ninth Circuit stay and allowed a district court injunction to take effect against California policies that plaintiffs say prevent schools from informing parents about a child's social gender transition at school without the child's consent. The court framed the case as involving both free exercise and parental rights claims. And so I just wanted to get a sense of where, thinking about those three cases, what's the current temperature in the environment for LGBTQ rights, all of that, and the it seems like collision right now with Christianity in particular, but even beyond that, I know Mahmoud v. Taylor, there was Muslim parents that were part of that as well. And so just would love to hear, where are we? Where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a challenging moment for the LGBTQ community, and there's so much backsliding. It's everywhere. It's part of Project 2025. It should surprise no one. I mean, it's even, affecting the scouts, the Boy Scouts, where Christian nationalist and former, Fox News host Pete Hegseth, who has, Christian nationalist, Christian crusader tattoos on his body and everything else, has now said that they can't, they have to exclude, LGBTQ kids. And it's also happening in, at the Supreme Court level. I mean, I think the Mahmoud v. Taylor case was a really bad decision because it essentially allows conservative religious parents to have veto power over like a public school's curricula. And for like the very sort of basic types of things that they teach, right? Because like here, this was like a reading curriculum that just, where the school and through its own process and the community had determined, and it wasn't forcing a belief system. It was just saying, let's include some books with different kinds of people because we have these people in our communities, and public schools can be like a glue, right? They can kind of teach us how to coexist across our differences. That's one of the beauties of them. Like a lot of people, by the way, ask me like, were you like, I've had people like when I clerked for a federal district court judge, and the woman who was sort of transcribing during court, who was Black, said to me like, we were friends, and she's like, did you go with Black people? And I was like, yes, I did. I went to public school in Chicago. She's like, I could tell. And like, so it's like we learn to be with people who are different from us. And that's what, they were trying to do. But what essentially happens when you allow this opt out for parents for like kind of basic curricular things is public schools can't deal with that. Like they can't deal with, okay, what are we going to do with these like 25 kids and then these 25 kids at the same time? So effectively, they start to change what's being taught. And by the way, like that decision didn't even like, it didn't even distinguish between like, okay, what if parents have an issue with like, evolution being taught in science class? Like, can they, on the same grounds, right? Like the religious rights of parents say, I don't want my kid to learn in biology, then what's going to happen? Or like, honestly, if you start to think about, and I'm not like, I know I don't like to cry wolf and I don't like to do that. Okay. But like, it's not a far stretch to say, what if a parent says, I don't want my kid to be taught by a gay teacher because that's contagious, or that's against my religious beliefs, or like, that's a choice, or like, I don't want my kid to be in a classroom with this kid who's just gender queer or transitioning or whatever is going on with that kid. Like where does that lead us to? And I think the Mirabelli like shadow docket decision that just happened that you referenced, about the California law is really important because they're like the court, by the way, like, the shadow docket too, right? Like not even hearing like any arguments in the case. You know what I mean? Like that's how the shadow
So
docket just.
what does it mean they stay? So what do they do
Okay, but
exactly?
for one, they make their decision without even hearing both sides. That's the shadow docket, right? Um, and they stayed.
It sounds so mysterious.
I
The
know
shadow.
the shadow. Well, yeah, I mean, it is mysterious, because like you don't even get to kind of hear how both sides are talking about it. Everything else has that, oral argument that happens, but not this, right? This is like a shadow docket decision. And the stay just means like they stopped what the district court like said. And so the district court, sorry, they stopped what the appellate court said, excuse me. So basically, you had the courts below that were like sympathetic to the California law. The California law lets, teachers make a decision to, where the kids' safety feels like it would be in jeopardy or, whatever, to not share what's going on with the kid with their gender identity, like if the kid is shared, and the Ninth Circuit appellate court agreed with the law, not with the parents that were challenging the law and bringing the lawsuit, right? And so, basically the you know the Supreme Court comes in and says, we disagree, we're not even hearing either side, but we're going to interpret the Mahmood decision, right, even more broadly than about curriculum. We're going to just say these parents' rights in public schools, they transcend even just like, these things about like what the kids are learning, but even like a state law that's put in place to protect kids. Parents' rights get to have an exemption to that. And so, we're going to actually like block for now this law from being able to be in effect. Okay. So that's like what they did. And I think like what's so dangerous about it is the court is, without even hearing argument and in the shadow docket, they're broadening like a decision, this Mahmood decision that has like very real impact. I mean, this feels like this is like kind of an even more crazy example, but can you imagine if like, parents are like, okay, like, let's say they're Orthodox Jews. I'll use my own faith, but I'm not Orthodox, but I'll use Jews. And they're like, we are kosher. We are a kosher family. And a teacher sees a kid trying their friend's bacon because, kids are kids, and kids are just experimenting or whatever. Do they now have to go tell like, are they going to get in trouble if they don't go tell the parents about that? I mean, it just, what are we opening ourselves up to, and again, I just want to be really clear. I am a parent. I have 3 children. Like parents' rights are real. And like, I understand the importance of parents having, I don't think parents have no rights when it comes to their kids. For example, I think parents have the right to raise their kids in their own faith. I mean, it might not stick, but like, I feel really strongly about that, after losing 6 million of my own people, like, in my dad's lifetime. So like, I want that right. And so that's one of the reasons why, when I send my kids to public school, which I did, like, I want to know that like, they're not going to be taught a faith that's not their own. Like that is pure parental rights, and that's a beautiful thing. Parents' rights has been co-opted by like one side, but and also like, people on the left will push back their students' rights too. And there are, and I believe in that too. So, but I think the point here is it's a very bad moment in this country for the LGBTQ community. And I think that's because of this Christian nationalism problem that we have right now, right? Which is imposing one narrow set of religious views that some wouldn't even call Christian, but others would, on all of us. And it's really harming a lot of people who, frankly, like are just trying to live their own lives. Like they're not trying to impose anything. They just want to love who they love, like be who they are. You know what I mean? Like I honestly, like I find, I have to say, a lot of people in that space, that's not my personal like identities, but I find it really inspiring and brave because even today, in a lot of parts of this country, we know it's still hard. It was really hard when I was young, but it's still hard to be different. And honestly, like when somebody steps into who they are and they're just like, this is who I love and this is like who I am, it makes it easier for me to say certain things too about myself. Like we all have many ways, like me being Jewish is one of them, that we're vulnerable. And it's honestly, like I find it kind of inspiring.
Yeah. Well, my last question for you. I mean, this is a midterm year, and yeah, I'm just curious on how you feel about the Johnson Amendment and its ability to stand up in this election year.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing with the Johnson Amendment, right? I mean, it's been around for over 70 years. It's enjoyed bipartisan support. It enjoys tremendous amount of support from the faith community. It's probably like our most palatable issue for like everyone. It basically says if you're going to have the benefit of being able to, have this special status of tax exempt, then you have to abide by these rules. Like you can't be partisan, you can't endorse candidates, you can't oppose candidates, because no one really wants their charity or house of worship to turn into like a pack, like it's divisive. It doesn't represent where we are. And frankly, like it creates more dark money, right? That we don't even know, right? Where that political money would be coming from or how much. I mean, it's the last thing we need when there's so many election integrity issues right now. So it enjoys so much support. It's like, I think it shouldn't be under threat. And yet it's honestly like Trump, falsely claims that he's abolished it or whatever. It's not true. I mean, there was this effort unilaterally from the Trump administration in this settlement in this Texas case to sort of say that it no longer exists as to churches.
It was the national like religious broadcasters or something.
Yeah, exactly. And the truth is, like, it hasn't been clear how much enforcement there has been through Democratic and Republican administrations recently. That said, you wouldn't know because it's like an IRS thing. But there's not been that many like public, signals that it's been something that's been being applied anyway. I think like when that happened from the Trump administration in this case, like I went on the Al Sharpton show, and I'll tell you that like a lot of the Black church leaders were really worried about like uneven application. Like, is it going to be applied to like exempt the white big evangelical churches that are, being partisan, but like a Black church could still somehow be gotten? So I think there's all sorts of concerns in all the communities, about getting rid of the Johnson Amendment. And I think, I feel like that's something that stands to survive over time.
Well, I just really appreciate your perspective, actually. And it's I don't know, I feel all sorts of different ways about what's happening right now with religion in our culture. It's, it's funny. There's a time in which I thought this is what I would have wanted. This is what people around me said, hey, this is going to be great. And I'm in it and I don't feel that way at all. I feel very much the opposite. Why? Well, because I don't want to force people to believe things that they don't actually believe. And so like, for me, it's like, I do not want more and more, if the gospel means anything, it means something because someone has willingly chosen it and has willingly responded. So as a Christian, what I'm saying is that, and at the core of Christianity is Jesus' call, and it's the gospel. And when you take it and you put state power behind it, you inevitably corrupt it, I think. And I don't like what's happening. I think it's idolatry personally. And yeah, I'm definitely like one of those people that's not all about the Christian nationalism, although, it definitely can get complicated when it's about Christian values and how much they should impact things. And, just personally, I wrestle with that. But more and more, I'm just a libertarian, like, hey, just have the government do as little as possible.
Josh, and I think it's fine. Like, I think it's fine to go to Congress as a Christian, and say, these are my values. And this is like really what I wish America would be, because the job of Congress people is to put that through the democracy sifter and to be like, okay, how does that, because we have this shared, constitution that we all also agree. I think the two can coexist beautifully, but it's like, okay, like, how do I take what some of my constituents really want to happen and then put that through like the sifter of democracy and then come out with something that fits with our constitution that keeps us together? I think that's fine. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
you have to keep it back, and I think that you can take your religion into the public square. I was just on the metro the other day and like I was proselytized. Like these guys were like,
Nice.
come to church
Or
on
not
Sunday,
nice. I don't
and
know.
I was like, I'm in DC. What? But
That's
I think
funny.
there's more and more of that, and that's allowed. But that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that with me. It's interesting to hear your.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I mean, I definitely would consider myself like coming down to what I think people would consider conservative views. Like, for instance, I think I'm very pro-life. I mean, in that thing of what you would consider. Again, I really don't like these labels. They're so misleading. But I'm probably, I'm in that most or all people like abortion at any time or most of the times or illegal. Some like for most times, I'm probably in the like, and there needs to be regulation around it. It needs to like, to me, there's a few times where it makes sense.
Mhm.
But that's where I lean because of my convictions for a variety of reasons. But I'm like, I don't think I don't know. We have to make room for other people because we've gotten into this mess that we're in. So I'm trying to figure out pluralism. And I think that pluralism is widely misunderstood in evangelical circles, widely misunderstood.
How
It is
so?
seen, well, it's seen as a deep evil or a deep threat. And I think that actually it's probably the thing that we want more than anything else. We talk about how we want the early church, early church, early church. The reality was the early church existed in a profoundly pluralistic society in the first century. And it was not a society in which they had power or prestige. And within that context is where Christianity actually did some pretty amazing work and expanded by against all odds. And so I think that I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them being I believe in the resurrection of Jesus, but I think no matter what you believe about that particular thing, you look at it and there's like this there was this communal aspect to Christianity that was pretty profound. And it was in a pluralistic society. And I think that they were in a marketplace of ideas and they had to, number one, prove themselves through the works that they did and then create very sophisticated defenses of their faith. So I think that the pluralism is not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, but I think the fear is that there's going to be retribution or some kind of oppression or suppression.
What you just
maybe.
said also reminds me of another reason to have church state separation is that it forces religions to thrive and compete, and sort of be
Yes.
at their best.
Absolutely.
And it's just what you said, you know what I mean? And like you see the best performance from religion in those contexts.
Yes.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, I absolutely thanks for asking those questions. And Rachel, really appreciate you coming on to the show. How can people connect with you guys? Where would you send them? And just kind of sell what you guys do there or where you want them to go.
So, number one, like we exist to defend your religious freedom. So if you witness a church state separation violation or you are part of one, please report the violation on our website. Go to au.org and you can see a big button for file a report, and go ahead and file it. And our lawyers will look at that right away and be in touch with you. And we've had a lot of success actually pre-litigation.
Including if you're in the military?
Including if you're in the military, absolutely. Including if you're in the military. And we're there for you, so that's like thing number one. And number two is just, if you have the means, even if it's modest, consider making a donation, because we are up against a $1 billion shadow network, that's actually coming to light before our eyes. And, we've grown our annual revenue, and that's fantastic, but we are just nowhere near where we need to be. I mean, groups like, Lions Defending Freedom on the other side, I mean, they're at over 100 million every year. Federal
Holy
Society, they're all just way over 100 million, and we're, kind of down under 20 million. So, we could use the support, if you have people to connect us to, and also we could use your voice. Like, we know we have the power of the people on our side. And so, if you have the means, give. And if you don't, use your voice and let us give you hope and connect you to how to find power, with your voice. Because, it's like that thing when like just one person claps, it's just one clap, but you have a whole room clap, and it's really loud, and that's power.
Right.
And we actually have the power of the people on this issue on our side. So, connect with us at au.org, sign up for our list, and we'll make sure we connect you into your own power.
Well, thanks so much, Rachel. It's been a blast having this conversation with you again.
To you guys.
But to our viewers, guys, thanks for joining us.
True.
And until next time, guys, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. Thanks. Bye.